We're joined by Sean Tory, a Black Lives Matter organizer. And Sean, want to talk a little bit about really the exact purpose and the focus and the mission, if you will, of Black Lives Matter. For those that maybe don't understand it, or need more clarity on it, are new to it, talk a little bit about it and kind of the beginnings of it with Trayvon Martin back in 2013 and really the mission.
Right. Well, to be clear, I'm not the organizer for Black Lives Matter, but I have been active in assisting with Black Lives Matter's protests here in the
Fair
city.
enough.
I've assisted. So Black Lives Matter definitely started during, it started out, of course, as folks know, as a hashtag, but it wasn't meant to only be a hashtag. It's actually a statement. It's a matter of course, we know that our lives in America matter. However, we're talking about a time where Black lives, it's always a question mark, or it's always justifiable for Black lives being murdered in public by police, and not only just police, but just others in general. When we see it happening, or when public sees it, there's not much of a response, and that's where the issue lies, and that's where the hashtag comes from. Because for years we've seen it happen from all the way back to Rodney King, and even before Rodney King. The stories are not new. There's pictures that surface from the 60s and beyond. So the police brutality has never just been something that's just during this decade, the previous decades, or decades before. It's always something that's been going on. However, that's initially where the hashtag, or what like people say hashtag, came from, but the organization itself spurred from that and developed more and has been active since. But myself, I'm a community servant. So I'm just someone who's been active in the background, as well as helping others, like community leaders like Minister Stretch Saunders, who's the president for New Era Las Vegas. And a lot of my participation with the Black Lives Matter protests have been with New Era Las Vegas, because I am also a member of New Era Las Vegas. So, yes. As
a community server, as you say, talk a little bit about how important it is to build local power, for Black Lives Matter to be demonstrated and enacted on a local community level. Why is that so essential?
I would say it's essential because there's a lot of policies that goes against Black lives in multiple industries. When you look at education, when you look at I'll say education mainly, because that's the main focus that I can go towards. There's definitely other industry. Oh, the military as well. When there's policies intact or in place that go against people of their hair or how they dress, and the language in there doesn't directly say, this person of color can't wear this, that, and the third. They write it in a policy, and they write it in a language to where it's like, okay, you can't do this. And it even stems from, like, if you look at back when the Miami Hurricanes played football in college sports back in the day, when they were running like crazy, doing all the highlights, the showboating, that next very year, it was all Miami Hurricanes doing this. You cannot do this on the field. You cannot do this on the field. That changed the course of college football and how we look at football when it comes to showboating. But who was primarily the group that did that? African Americans. So when you look at those things, it's like, okay, it's not going to be purposely done in a way to point out somebody, but it will be placed in a part where it's going to come back around, resurface.
Sean, when you look at the protests after the murder of George Floyd, and you look at them locally in Las Vegas, mm-hmm. How do you judge it? Do you deem it a success in terms of the local response? Do you think it engendered change? How do you assess the protests that happen here in Las Vegas?
I'll say it's a start. It doesn't only start there. So I will say this tragedy that happened to George Floyd was something a lot bigger than what we've seen in the past. Like, a lot of people started taking it seriously. We've seen different communities come out this time around, which was great. Like, you've seen the Amish community, you've seen people from the Jewish community, you've seen a lot of people who are supporters and allies come out for Black lives, because now they see, like, oh my goodness, like this, and this is something that's continuously going on, and people are fed up. However, the protests definitely have helped, but it's not the end game. We have to be involved in our local our local politics. We have to be involved in the state and federal. So those are things that people need to be aware of and be involved in.
Good friend of mine grew up in Watts, and he was in the LA riots. He was at Florence and Normandy, and he talked a lot about his experience with me. We're similar age during the LA riots. And he talked about some of his frustration with, during the George Floyd protests, people being there for the wrong reasons, people that were not there to protest, that were there to cause destruction and damage, and they clearly did not get the cause.
Right.
How frustrating is that for you, and how would you say Black Lives Matter as an organization handles that, where someone is showing up to clearly cause havoc and they're not there for equality?
Well, I definitely, I feel it depends. Like for me, who's someone who does help in the background, or who's on the front lines, it is frustrating. And those are the times where we address it. You know, those are the times where it's like, hey, like this is not what this cause is about. And use it as a teachable moment. But of course, there's people you just can't control. And those are certain things that now I see that what I'm happy about this time around with protesting, people finally saw that, okay, it's not BLM doing everything, or it's not people who are Black who are organizing, or people who are supporters and allies and causing these issues. It's these few people. And I will say the interactions I've had with certain police officers, they noticed that they weren't a part of us and handled it accordingly. So that's been the good part that I have noticed with the protests going on. When folks are like, hey, we don't know them, they're not a part of this, we definitely try to handle it peacefully, just as much as the police officers that's been interacting with us as well. Yeah,
we heard that from police too, that there were people there that were protesting for equality and all the right reasons, and then there was kind of a separate fringe element. It is such a divided time in our country. Yeah. And there's people, even in the viewership, they're going to watch this interview and they're going to say, well, Black Lives Matter, it is anti-police or it is radical. How do you respond to any misconceptions or misunderstandings that you feel the public or maybe even the media has? How do you respond and really get our viewers to the truth of this, as you already have in this interview? But how do you respond to those perceptions?
What I'll say is just because myself or others are pro-Black doesn't mean we're anti anything. We were definitely not anti anything. And again, like I said before, I'm not someone who's an official member of BLM, but I am someone who is a supporter, and I am someone who is Black and who does embrace Black Lives Matter. I will say, anytime you think that it's anti-racist group, that's not the case. A lot of us are just saying like, hey, listen, Black Lives Matter as well. That's it. It shouldn't be a question mark for someone who is Black, or for someone who is Black and who has been wrongfully murdered, to be questioned of their character after they died. Like someone's father, someone's son, someone's mother, sometimes, and Black women as well. Some of these folks are mothers, children to others, and we don't have empathy for that. And that's something that we've witnessed time and time again. And anytime someone says, oh, okay, well, think like it's anti this, anti that, think about the Black officers who don't get to speak often about how they feel about BLM. I have a lot of friends who are Black officers who have who definitely love the badge, but also are Black men, Black women, and and are caught in the middle. I have those friends. And then we have other folks who don't understand what law enforcement means, or not, I wouldn't say means, but really don't understand the importance. And so now you have two communities colliding, but we don't sit down to have those conversations, because we have those stories, because we've had times where we've been wrongfully accused of doing this, or we've been wrongfully profiled for many reasons. I've been stopped, and I'm a PhD student. But when you look at me, you don't see that. I'm somebody who wears a hat and a hoodie, and I'm automatically assumed I'm deemed to be this person. But I'm a PhD student. I'm a father. I have 2 daughters, So those are things that I want people to think about before just racially profiling, or not just racially profiling, but profiling somebody just based off of how they look and their skin tone. To get to the core. Just think about that. That's it.
Absolutely. To get to the core of that person. And on that note, we always hear people say, well, I'm not racist.
Yeah.
How important is it for those people that maybe haven't experienced racism and they don't perpetuate it. They say, well, I'm not racist. How important is it for them to be anti-racist? And for somebody who's maybe not familiar with that phraseology, expand on that for people to really be anti-racist in their life.
But it all stems from empathy, right? That's where we start. I may not understand what you've experienced. I may not understand what it's like to walk in these shoes. Or for myself, I'm born and raised in America. I do not know what it's like to be an immigrant, to come here to this country. I recognize my privilege in that, and I stand with immigrants who come here to make a better life, do everything they need to do, and know much more about America than most Americans do, right? But I'm not an immigrant, but I understand that, you know what? I have empathy for that person because they came across this country for a better life, and they wanted to do more for the next generations to come. So if I can have empathy, if myself or many others can have empathy for someone who I culturally don't connect with, or also someone who's not from this country, how can we do the same for people who were born in this country and who has a systemic issue and history of being oppressed? Why can't we do that? Just be open-minded. You don't have to agree with it, but it happens. Just because you don't see it, just because it's never happened to you, does not mean it happens. And just because, so for example, just because you're an immigrant doesn't mean we're just only talking about folks on the border of Mexico. You forget a whole nother coast as well, who come from Africa, who come from these different countries, who are just trying to make a better life for themselves as well.
Well said. Question for you about progress, the progress that has been made, but also really what you want to see happen. As I mentioned earlier, it's really a divided time in our country. What is the progress you really want to see with equality in, say, maybe the half decade or decade that's ahead of us?
See, and this is a troubling question for me because we stem between the question of equality and equity, right? So what's the difference between equality and equity? Equality, okay, everyone has the same level playing, right? But
Sure.
then we don't talk about those. Okay, we do that, but then what about the special needs students? What about this person who's hearing deficient? I'm someone who's partially deaf. So what if someone who can barely see? How are we measuring the level of equity and equality? And are we changing those within these policies? Are we making it available for people of color and folks in general who live in this country, the ability to live in certain neighborhoods they would love to, or gain resources and abilities to make their families generate? Are we doing that? Those are the things I look to for us to progress as a country.
Do you see a bright future? Do you worry about the future, or do you think it is going to be better days ahead?
Honestly, that's on God's. That's my faith. I believe that's on God's time. All I can do as someone who's a community servant, I can do my part in this community that God placed me on this earth to do, which is to daily help and make it better for the students that I interact with and the youth that I interact with around me. So I hope my little pinky nail can help, and that's what I hope we all can do. So yeah, there's a part of me that says, you know what, things always get worse before it gets better. I hate that because I don't hate's a strong word. I despise that a little bit because it's a cliche quote, but sometimes that's the truth.
Yeah.
And I pray nothing but I pray that we get to a point where it's a lot better days, because realistically we'll always have issues in this country. There'll always be something. But are we empathetic? Are we genuine? Are we honest with ourselves? Are we tactful when we're being honest as well? Because honesty without tact leaves room for cruelty. So are we actually doing the things to move forward in an effective way?
I loved your comments about empathy throughout this interview, because that is such an essential part of this, of really truly putting yourself in someone else's shoes and understanding their experience is not necessarily your experience. Well said. And Sean, we appreciate your time. Continued luck in your PhD studies. I hope it goes well. And keep enjoying those two little girls.
Thank you. I deeply appreciate it. Thank you for your time. And again, I'm just a community servant, someone who loves. I'm born and raised native here in Las Vegas. Someone who is a member of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I'm also someone who's a member of New Era Las Vegas. I'm someone who's just active, who cares about this community. And that's what I want people, not just about me, but people in general who do look like me. We love this country just as much as anyone else, but we don't. But by any means, I'm not the spokesperson as well. But I will say, I know my role as a leader, or whatever label they want to place on me. But I understand we want to be just as respected as well, and valued. Most importantly, valued in this country.
Your care for the community, for our community, does come across absolutely. And we appreciate your time, Sean. Thanks so much for bringing this information and especially some of the background and hopefully a little hope for the future and better days ahead. Thank you, Sean.
No, thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.